view and not just a philosophical idea. What scientific evidence do we have that random genetic mutations actually make those kinds of changes in living things without making an assumption? What scientific evidence is there for that?
What kind of changes specifically are you looking for?
Well, the changes that evolution causes that makes one type of life arise from an antecedent. You get a whale from a land-dwelling creature. You get a reptile from a fish. You get birds from small theropod dinosaurs, chicken-sized or less. These structural design changes that result in all the anatomical features of every living thing. Because that's what evolution creates. That's why we have a tree of life. Why we have giraffes and rhinoceros and hippopotamus and spider monkeys and blue jays and cardinals and barn owls. It's because the structural designs are devised by random genetic mutations occurring. Right. So what scientific evidence do we have that mutations have the power to do this?
Well, it's all about incremental changes. Are we live, by the way? Is this being recorded?
Yes, it's live.
Okay. So, I mean, you've heard the spiel 1,000 times probably about how life diversifies at the moment of breeding. But just to address your question specifically, it's just every incremental change can add up, and that's just the basic mechanism. And I can point to any single incremental change, but that doesn't seem to satisfy you.
Okay, so it's your belief that incremental changes build up one onto another, and cause this structural design change to move in a particular direction and build incrementally all the various structural designs and anatomical features of the big things. But that's a belief, though. But what I'm asking for is what testable and observable evidence from what's observed from, when scientists do studies of mutation, they cause mutations to occur in various types of creatures, mostly bacteria, but they've also tested, flies and other creatures. And from examining the mutations that take place in the creatures that they induce mutations into, what scientific evidence do we have from what's been observed from the actual effects of genetic mutation that show us that mutation has the power to cause that structural kind of change?
Yeah, so why do you believe that there are different kinds of cats or different kinds of fish or different kinds of sharks?
Well, that's not answering my question.
It is, because it's the same answer.
No, I'm asking what scientific evidence is there from the observed effects of genetic mutation that would indicate that mutations are capable of doing that. Is there any?
Yeah, you believe it too, because you believe in diversity among the kinds.
No, I don't.
So why do you believe that?
Well, because
you don't believe that sharks are all related?
Well, because there's no there's no anatomical difference between.
Have you ever seen a hammerhead shark?
That's morphological difference. That's the shape.
Shape
is not anatomical. Shape is morphological.
Do you think there's an anatomical or morphological difference between a lizard and a snake?
There is anatomical difference. One has bones and tendons and muscles and cartilage. The other does not.
Yeah, what about a limbless lizard?
Well, is it really a lizard, or is it the evolutionist calling a snake a lizard?
We can tell from the skull.
Well, that would be a difference in shape, maybe. Okay, but what anatomical feature is there? See, what evidence do we have that anatomical features are devised by mutation?
Well, I want to know why you believe that happens between the kinds, and we could start from there, because that will help me understand the gap of your understanding.
Well, all I can see is that you're shying from the question. By trying to flip it around and ask me why I don't believe it. That's
why are you dodging the question then?
I'm not. I'm trying to get you to answer mine.
Yeah, well, I've given you my answer a lot, so I want to know why you do, because you probably know what I'm going to say.
No, you didn't give me the answer. The answer was, what evidence is there from the observed effects of mutation that would indicate that mutation builds, accruing mutations build structural design in living things?
Because every generation is different from the last. So
But
why
how
do
are
you believe it? I
if
get to
that's
ask a question now.
if every okay, but are they different in a way that's anatomical?
Which ones?
Any one generation is different from another. You say they're changing. What you're trying to tell me is you believe it because organisms are changing in their structural design one generation to another. I don't
Yeah.
believe that. I don't. They are
Yeah, so
really
you can change, you might be able to only change 1 degree at a time, but that can add up to 1 trillion degrees.
what evidence of structural design change do we see in living things that would indicate that mutation is the cause of it?
We see mutations or different alleles of the Hox genes, which encode for structural design.
Okay, so what features can we look at organisms, generations that exist in this world, and see that the structural design is changing?
See that the structural, what do you mean changing?
Well, that's what you're claiming. You guys believe that the structural
There
design
is
of living things is changing.
there is no creature that changes its structural design. It's only populations. We
Okay,
can
so
see
what
we can
populations do we see are changing in structural design?
what you are looking for is something like uh, a completely new body plan.
No, 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 no. No, you say you believe it happens incrementally. Where do we see these increments occurring in the body plans of living things today?
Do you want examples from today?
Well, yeah, that's why I asked for observable.
How long is your range that you're looking for?
Oh, I don't know, whatever is observable. So, a human lifespan.
So, would you count the loss of legs as a change to body plan?
Well, that wouldn't support evolution because evolution has to explain the arrival of the feature and not a losing one.
No, that's still evolution.
No, well, you might think it is, but if you had nothing but loss, you're never going to get new types of living things that way.
Yeah, you can.
Okay,
You could
so
get a snake from a lizard.
so what you're trying to do is hide your answer in the idea that creatures can lose things, but I want to center on that creatures gain because evolutionists claim the stinger in the tail of a scorpion came into being when it didn't before exist, and the blowhole in a whale came into existence when there was no blowhole before, and the pancreas of a chimpanzee came into being when there was no pancreas, and the all the features of living things in such the stinger in the abdomen, the thorax, excuse me, of a bee, and the pincers of a beetle, they came into existence where they didn't before. You understand what I'm asking? So what evidence do we have from mutation that mutation builds incremental change in the structural design of living things?
Well, when do I get to ask my question?
When you answer mine, maybe.
Well, I've answered a lot of your questions.
Well, you didn't answer that question.
Because you keep moving the goalposts.
No, I'm not moving the goalpost. I'm simply asking. Hold on a second. I got a message from Standing for Truth email. Okay, so he can't join at this time because of something going on with his child. He's got responsibilities at home with a child and a wife, and something's going on there, and it's keeping him from. It's not a problem. It's just something he's doing with his child, and he can't join right now. Maybe he will later. Okay, so I'm just going to take it that you don't have scientific reason to believe that mutations do this because you can't provide an example.
Can arise new traits?
Well,
or get new genetic material? What exactly are you asking? for?
Well, I don't know why it's so hard to understand what I'm asking.
Because you keep moving the goalposts.
No, I haven't moved the goalpost at all. The question is
Oh,
exactly
yes, you
the
have.
same now as it was in the beginning. You know, I'll elucidate it more clearly if I have to. You often have to do that with evolutionists. Evolutionists claim that a fish evolved legs with new bones and a swim bladder transformed into lungs. Two, by the way, not one lung, but two. Those are anatomical changes that yield a land-dwelling creature. Okay, the
Do you
evolutionists
can I can
believe
I
that,
can I ask, do you think those are anatomical changes?
well, of course, those are anatomical.
Okay. All right.
You know what anatomy means?
Yeah, go on. I'm
Yeah,
just trying to confirm.
yeah. So, I mean, and the list goes on. I mentioned some of the features of living things: the stinger in the tail of a scorpion, the stinger in the tail of a bee, the pincers on the on in a beetle. Um, you know, all these features and more. Countless examples in all the living things. You do believe that fish evolved into land-dwelling creatures with legs and digits and wrist bones and new cartilage and new tendons and new muscles and got lungs, right? You believe that story. But that would
Mhm.
so that's anatomical difference. That's anatomical change. Structural designs being developed by accruing mutation. So I'm just wondering if this is scientific to believe, then we should have some kind of evidence that it's happening, that mutations have the power to do this. From what we observe, the effects of mutations are in creatures living in the world today. But even, no evolutionist is able to provide an example of that. None. And so I just really want to point out to you that's a belief you may have, but it's not science to say it's true. Because science relies on what's observable, testable, and repeatable, right? If you can't observe it, test it, or repeat it, you can't see it take place, then you can't say it's science. It's philosophy of science, perhaps, but not science. You got me?
Yeah, so we observe this biodiversity and we're trying to explain how it got here. So you said that fish evolved with legs with no bones, and evolving a swim bladder to lungs would be anatomical changes. So do you understand that incremental changes? Well, let me back up for a second. You said there were no bone changes.
I didn't say there were no bone changes. I said,
Okay, so
no.
refresh my memory. Fish
Well, I just,
evolved legs with no new bones. Is that what you said?
no, I said they gained legs from lobe fins.
Yeah.
Okay. That means new bones, new tendons, new muscles, new cartilage. They developed lungs instead of having a swim bladder. That's an
But
anatomical difference.
the thing is that they're not actually new. They're just different.
Well, no, they
They,
are
the
new
fish
because,
the fish had tendons in its fins. The fish had muscles. They have fingers. They have bones. They have little arm bones.
but
They just changed.
new muscles would have to arise for a
Yeah,
creature
that's
to have.
easy. That's easy. You just duplicate a gene, or you just
Okay,
upregulate the amount of muscle in that limb.
okay. So you believe that's easy, and but see, I'm wondering what scientific evidence we have that that happens. Instead, how do we don't have to that we don't need to rely on what we believe takes place, but we can observe, test, repeat. Because of
Well,
mutation. What incremental change in the structural design of of living things has ever been observed to take place because of genetic mutation that becomes fixed in the body plan of that animal, and then we can see a subsequent mutation occur that changes it a little more. Wouldn't you agree that we don't observe any such thing, but but evolutionists believe that lots of that takes place over a vast age of time, but we can't actually observe that. Nobody has observed anything like that, right?
so there is a difference between what happened and how it happened, right? So there's a difference between observing what happened and explaining how it happened. Are you with me?
Well, there is an inference that you can derive from what from your belief about evolution, but then there's also what we can actually observe about what mutations do when we observe a mutation induced into an organism and see what the effect is.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah, we observe to build the model based on mutation, and we infer that that's happening based on our observations of the fossil record.
Okay. But the fossil record doesn't show that, though.
Of course it does.
If it shows it, how come Stephen Stanley, Niles Eldridge, Stephen Jay Gould, Purcell Cloud, Ernst Mayr, and the whole massive host of eminent scientists have written in their own books that clear evidence of evolutionary transition is not known in the fossil record?
I don't know. Present some of their arguments. How come 99% of the other geologists disagree with them completely?
Okay, so but I'm talking about eminent scientists, and they all acknowledge this, right? So
Yeah, but they're in the minority, so it doesn't matter.
no, these
If
are some of the most
you're trying,
prominent scientists in the world. Stephen Jay Gould
I
was
don't
the world.
care.
Look. Stephen Jay Gould was the most prominent paleontologist in the world during his
Yeah,
lifetime.
I don't care.
Okay,
You're
so
trying
you're
to
saying,
invoke scientific consensus, but you're cherry picking which scientists.
okay, so but no, I mean, no scientist says. Show me where there's numerous statements by any paleontologists or anatomists or geneticists that say that we see incremental change occurring in the fossil record, clear evidence. Because I can show you a massive number of statements by eminent scientists that say that's not true. So if what these numerous scientists say is not true, and some of these are world experts in their field, then there is a war going on amongst evolutionists, where some believe there's all kinds of transitional forms, but many of the most prominent scientists in their fields would disagree with them. Is that what you're saying? That they are in disagreement with each other?
You think that the scientific community does not observe incremental change in the fossil record?
No, they don't. Look, Colin Patterson, Stephen
Then
Stanley.
what are you arguing against then?
Well, what I'm telling you is, you say we see this incremental change in the fossil record, and I'm pointing out to you that we don't, and the world's most eminent experts on that subject say there isn't clear
They're
evidence.
not the most imminent. They're not the most imminent. They're just the ones you cherry pick to support your thing.
No, they are the most eminent.
Most other ones disagree. So if you want to talk about scientific consensus, you'll lose that every time.
No, I win, because the ones that I point to are the most experts in their field.
That's laughable.
No, it's not laughable. David B. Kitts is professor of geology at the University of Oklahoma. Niles
I don't
Eldridge,
care.
we all know who he is.
If they were the most,
Listen, we're not
imminent,
going to talk over each other all night. Okay, let me give you a few examples. Okay, Stephen Jay Gould, the most eminent paleontologist for 25 years
wrong.
in the world, when he died, he said the same thing as he did in the beginning. No,
Don't care.
Okay, Purcell Cloud was president
Listen,
of the
I don't
American.
care. This is not convincing.
President of the American Academy of Sciences. He said the same thing.
Don't care.
David Rupt, curator of geology at the Field Museum of Natural History in Chicago, one of the world's foremost experts on the fossil record. He says it. Okay, so when you said that these men that I point out, George Gaylord Simpson, for crying out loud, when I point out these men and say these are some of the most eminent scientists in their field, and they all state there's no clear evidence for evolutionary transition in the fossil record, and you said that's not true, I'm pointing out that is not true. What you said is not true. They do say that, and these men are some of the most eminent scientists in their field for the last 40 years, and they agree with each other about the matter. So
they're not the most eminent scientists in their field, or else they would have the scientific consensus. A scientist's opinion is not science. So you're cherry picking this.
Now you're telling me that Stephen Jay Gould was not the most eminent paleontologist in the world for 25 years?
I don't care. His opinions do not. His opinions don't constitute science.
Well, then I could say the same thing about anybody you pick and say the same thing. Would that make it correct?
Yep.
So, okay. So all you're pointing out is you don't care about the opinions of the most eminent scientists in the world when it comes to the fossil record. Okay. So then I'm just going to inform you that when you say that the scientists show evidence of clear transition in the fossil record, you're flat wrong, because world's eminent experts in that field say no. So
All the experts
So
agree that they do see change.
no, they don't. I just explained that to you. So
Yeah,
we don't have
99% do. So
no, they don't. So
yes, they do.
we don't have the evidence from the fossil record because the world's eminent scientists in their fields of paleontology, anatomy, natural history, geology, they all agree that there is no clear evidence of evolutionary transition in the fossil record. So,
That's a lie.
no, that's not a lie. Well, you want me to
Yes, it is. You're lying.
give you specific examples?
I don't care.
You
They,
don't
if
care?
they're the
Okay.
if those are the most imminent opinions in the
Yeah.
field,
Yeah.
then they would be the consensus. So
Well,
you're
then,
lying.
no, they're not. Now you're just in denial that these men are eminent scientists. I think that's bizarre that you have to do that.
No, you're conflating their opinions with scientific research.
No. So
Yes,
you're denying that these men. You've gone so far as to deny that these men are eminent in their field. That's bizarre to me. I find that
you're
really strange.
you're denying the 99% who disagree with them.
Yes, I deny the ones that disagree with
Yeah,
them.
so stop hanging your hat on authority and just get to the actual research.
Well, okay, the research shows that they don't exist. That's why these scientists make these clear statements.
What don't
Otherwise,
exist?
look, let me put it to you like this. Let's take Stephen Jay Gould, for example, Harvard University paleontologist, the most eminent paleontologist in the world. Okay, not right now. He died in the late 90s. Okay, but he was the world's foremost expert on the fossil record when he was alive, and he says we don't see it in the fossil record. Now, do you imagine? Let's imagine that. Um, Stephen Jay Gould says this, and all these other scientists know of countless examples of clear transitional evidence in the fossil record. And let's imagine then somehow Stephen Jay Gould, then, who writes books that are bought by the scientific community in big numbers, okay, more than one. So he writes his opinions and the evidence, describing the evidence in his books, and scientists around the world snap it up. Okay, so they all listen to him because he is the world's foremost expert on the fossil record, and he says it's not there. Okay, so what do you think would
What's
happen
not
to what?
what's not there?
Why? If let me ask you this: if why then, if he was so clearly wrong about this, why wasn't there ever any controversy over the statements of Stephen Jay Gould? Instead, a whole host of other experts agreeing with him in their own books. How come this didn't start some firestorm in the scientific community where scientists were throwing around insults about Stephen Jay Gould, and he gets called into the administration office of the University of Harvard and says, "What the hell are you doing, making these crazy whack-nut claims?" You know, how come nothing like that ever happened? Everybody who was eminent in their field relating to paleontology or geology just happened to be in agreement with it. Why is that?
I don't know. Clearly, they didn't change their consensus based on his opinion. So his opinion was not eminent at all in
So
that
the
sense.
eminent scientists agreed with him, and you're saying guys that work in who are not eminent, but the university professor somewhere who he disagrees. So that means that
If the eminent scientists
the
agreed with
eminent
him,
ones.
then young Earth creationism would be the scientific consensus.
I didn't say it has to be a consensus to be right. I'm asking. I'm telling you that the the opinion of the world's foremost experts on the fossil record acknowledge there is no clear evidence of evolutionary transition in the fossil record. You say there is.
You're picking the ones who agree with you and calling them the foremost experts.
I'm
There are other experts. Don't talk over me. There are other experts that disagree, and they outnumber yours.
Well, I'm pointing to the ones who are the world's considered to be the world's most expert. That doesn't
You
mean
consider them.
no, I don't. The world does.
No, then why didn't they change the scientific consensus?
Let me help you understand something.
No, answer my question.
If you're not going to become a paleontologist at Harvard University unless you are truly an expert, do you understand that? I mean,
Yeah.
they can pick and choose who to hire anybody. 20 paleontologists might apply for a job at
What are
Harvard,
his arguments? I
and
don't care about
only one
his
of them is going to get it. You understand that, right?
Yeah, I can make the same argument of any evolutionist that has a degree. So get to his arguments.
Well, the argument is that the world's foremost experts on the matter say there is no clear
That's
evidence.
not an argument. That's an argument from popularity, which is a logical fallacy.
Okay, so you can say it's a logical fallacy, but I'm just showing you, and it doesn't bother me a bit that these men believed in evolution. But they're honest when it comes to what that fossil record actually shows. So I just can't agree with you or accept your statement that the fossil record shows clear evidence of transition. The world's foremost experts on the fossil record for the last 100 years have all disagreed with you. And if you think they're wrong, maybe you could show us examples.
You're lying because
No, no.
no.
I can start
If that
reading
was,
this.
you're lying, or else it would be the scientific consensus, and the scientific consensus disagrees with you,
No, I'm not.
and that's how I know you're lying.
No, I'm not lying, and I'm just going to prove it to you right now. Okay.
Okay, give me his actual arguments,
Okay.
not an appeal to authority.
Okay. I'm gonna give you. I'm gonna show you what they say, and then I know it's going to be very uncomfortable for you. Stephen Stanley, one of the most eminent evolutionist scientists of our time right now, says, now I quote him directly, the fossil record fails to document a single example of phyletic evolution accomplishing a major morphological transition. Not one. He also says this, the fossil record itself provides no documentation of continuity, of gradual transitions from one kind of animal or plant into another quite different form. Okay, so he's living today. You can email him if you like. He may regret having said that, but he said it. All right, Stephen Jay Gould in 1980 stated this: everybody knows the fossil record doesn't provide much evidence of gradualism. It is full of gaps and discontinuities. Most species don't change. They may get a little bigger or bumpier. They remain the same species. This remarkable stasis has generally been ignored. It doesn't agree with your ideas. You don't talk about it. The fossil record doesn't show gradual change, and every paleontologist has known since Cuvier. So, I mean, that's Stephen Jay Gould. He was the world's foremost paleontologist for 25 years. I'm going to have to take his word for that. I really do believe it because so many others. Ernst Mayr, professor emeritus of zoology, Harvard University, he says this, and I'm going to quote him. Paleontologists have long been aware of seeming contradiction between Darwin's postulate of gradualism, confirmed by the work of population genetics. See, that's what he believes, okay, but he throws that in. He says, and the actual findings of paleontology, following phyletic lines through time, seem to reveal only minimal gradual changes, but no clear evidence for any change of a species into a different genus or for the gradual origin of an evolutionary novelty. Anything truly novel always seems to appear quite abruptly in the fossil record. Okay, and Stephen Jay Gould says this. He says, and this was in his book, Cordelia's Dilemma, written in Natural History, 1995, page 15. He says, stasis or non-change of most fossil species during their lengthy geological lifespans was tactfully and acknowledged by all paleontologists, but almost never studied explicitly because prevailing theory treated stasis as uninteresting non-evidence for non-evolution. The overwhelming prevalence of stasis became an embarrassing feature of the fossil record, best left ignored as a manifestation of nothing. I mean, he's not making these up. And when he said these things in his book, and I've got a tremendous number of other expert statements like this, there's consensus amongst the world's experts that clear evidence of transition is not seen in the fossil record. And when people like Stephen Jay Gould or Purcell Cloud or Stephen Stanley state this, there is no up in arms going on in the scientific community. They don't throw around insults at each other, and you don't see one eminent scientist getting on YouTube and making a video putting down the other guy for saying something that's scientifically incorrect. They don't disagree. They don't fight with each other about it because they're in agreement.
Right, because the scientific consensus is that there is change in the fossil record.
And the world's experts on the matter say there isn't.
Then what are you arguing against?
I'm arguing.
Do you think evolutionists believe that there is change in the fossil record?
You say that that incremental change is seen in the fossil record that moves one organism towards becoming another. This transitional series of transitional fossils exist in the fossil record. And I'm saying that's not true. The world's eminent scientists for the last 100 years have all been in agreement about it. But if you think it's true, you could provide evidence of it.
Do you answer my question? Do you believe evolutionists see change in the fossil record?
I believe some do in their imagination. What they actually don't see is gradual change. What they all see is one type of organism and another type, and they imagine that one changed into the other. That's what they imagine.
So you believe the scientific consensus is that there is no evolution observed in the fossil record?
The consensus of the world's experts on the fossil record is that no clear evidence of evolutionary transition is present.
So you qualified that. Do you not think that that's the scientific consensus?
That is the consensus of experts. We hear laypersons and we hear a lot of university professors say that it is there, but the experts in the field, the ones who are curators of the world's museums of natural history, the ones who are Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Stanford, Berkeley university professors and experts in the fossil record say no.
Yeah, but
If you think it's there,
more disagree, who are just as highly educated. So what do you think the scientific consensus is on the fossil record?
So if the consensus amongst the world's experts is that it's not there. Now, if you think it's there, maybe you could provide an example of one. Do you know of any?
What is the scientific consensus on the fossil record?
I just gave you a dossier of it. Now, if you believe that it's true,
you think those people speak for the scientific consensus?
Can you give an example? I've been asking you for 15 minutes now. Can you give an example of this clear evidence of transition in the fossil record? Just one?
Yeah, but I'm just trying to get you to get off of this this obsession with you only taking certain scientists as experts, because the argument shouldn't rest on who says it's true, right?
Okay, so then my opinion is just as valid as one of your university professors by your standard.
If you can demonstrate it, then yes, education is completely irrelevant.
Right. Who demonstrates it?
Right.
Let's see it demonstrated. Show us.
Okay. So I can demonstrate that, but I'll explain to you from my perspective.
Okay.
Why I believe that.
Okay, so please provide me a series of fossils that show clearly that one type of organism begots another over time in the fossil record. Know exactly what you'll provide. You're going to provide two varieties of the same organism, and there's going to be a morphological difference between the two, and you're going to say, look, one is changing into the other, but they're the same species, or they're in the same family, just like two different dogs, a Chihuahua and a Great Dane. They're both 100% dog. That's not clear evidence of evolutionary transition. It doesn't show anatomy changing. It shows morphological change. You're going to do that, or you're going to pick two creatures with different anatomies, and you're going to say, see, the one evolved into the other. That's not the thing that these experts are talking about. They're talking about one creature in the same family as another, showing anatomical change into the family of another. That's what they are talking about. There's no clear evidence that has ever taken place in the rocks. But if you can provide an example, we'd be happy to investigate it, to check it out.
Well, that's not what I'm going to do at all. But can you see my screen share?
Okay. No, I can't see it. So are you saying that you can't provide us an example of that then?
No, that's just not what I'm going to do. That's not why.
I've been asking you for 10 minutes to do it. Can you provide a series of fossils that show that happening? That we can see and that it's clear enough that we don't have to wonder, well, I don't know, is that really the same type of, I mean, it's pretty clear. This organism, obviously, these fossils show, and we can see it, and anybody who's not dumb as a tree stump can see that this change is taking place.
Yeah, but that's not the evidence that I use to believe evolution or to prove it.
Okay, I'm just going to accept your inability to provide an example of what
no, you keep interrupting me every time I go to try and explain it.
Well, I don't need explanation. I want example. Anybody can explain anything. I can explain this. The space monkeys driving Cadillacs around Mars, throwing pizzas on
No,
the
but
window, but I
you,
can't show it to you.
you predicted that I would show you a series of fossils, but that's just not what I'm going to do.
Okay, then you can't show me.
I can, but I'm not going to use that as my evidence.
Right, so you can't then.
Do you want me to show you one?
I've been asking you for 15 minutes now to show me an example of this happening. You say it does. The world's most eminent experts on the fossil record have been saying for 100 years that we don't have that in the fossil record. But you say it's there, so I've asked you to provide an example.
Well, you asked me to provide
If you, if you
evidence.
if you can't, we can just go off onto something else.
You asked me to provide evidence of evolution, so I'm going to use a different way that you didn't predict.
Okay, so I assume that means you can't provide an example of that. We can talk about something else if you like.
Yeah, I can. It's just I know it's not
Well,
going to convince you.
if you could, you would. I think. And I don't.
No, I just know I've already done that, and I've seen you deny it before.
No,
So
you haven't. No, you've never done that. I'm
yeah,
asking you to now. I mean, if it's so clear, I mean, and there's a lot of it. You say there's lots of examples. Wow. I mean, can't you provide one?
Yeah, what's your number one best example of a transitional fossil in the fossil record? Is that kind of what you're asking for there, Neff?
no,
Well,
he
that'd be a
asked.
good question. Yeah, that would be. I mean, it'd be a place to start, I guess. Yeah.
No, you predicted that I would start there, but that's not where I'm going to start. That's all
Well,
I'm saying. I'll end with that. I'll end with that.
Okay. Any example that clearly shows anatomical change of one type of living thing towards becoming another, into another. That'd be cool.
Yeah.
Well, the thing is, they're going to need to provide millions of these apparent transitional forms, and all they can do is point to 1, 2, maybe 3. But even with us, based on the design model, we would predict, mosaic creatures. Look at the platypus, look at the penguin, look at Tiktaalik, look at Archaeopteryx, because even some products of human design, and that's what we look towards in the design model. We even predict these nested hierarchies, that these human designs even appear to span 2 categories. So if we look at, say, boats and tanks, we would even agree that they would fall into entirely different classes, but yet there exist vehicles that blend the features of these 2 very different means of transportation, right? Take an amphibious assault vehicle, for example, Taylor, and we would, I hope, agree that that vehicle, that mode of transportation, would be resistant to classification. So that would be a perfect example of, say, a mosaic form, or what an evolutionist might interpret as a transitional form, because that vehicle is designed for the transitional environments between water and land. And even crossover vehicles now, classification in regards to crossovers, say the Dodge Journey, the Ford Flex, they resist classification. It's neither a van, it's neither an SUV. But the thing is, we predict mosaic creatures, but you guys need millions of them. So it actually better fits our model anyways in regards to what we see in the fossil record. And just like Neff was saying, we see stasis. That's all we see is stasis, which is an abrupt appearance of body forms. So there's really no novelty. Like, I don't see any evidence in the fossil record for what you're talking about.
Yeah, there aren't any examples. Now, Taylor, you said you were gonna. I got you. I managed to find out why you weren't presenting. It had something to do with me having to click on something. Your screen sharing. So can you show us this example of clear evidence of evolutionary transition in the fossil record?
Mm-hmm. Well, so no one disputes that there's transitional forms between these, and these evolve between each other. So you have just the same burden to provide every single little micro change, but that doesn't matter. So we'll move on.
So there
Yeah,
are
but
no
the thing is-
anatomical differences between those cats. That's the problem. They have the same anatomy. They're different in size, shape, colors, and patterns. Not anatomy. That doesn't work. We need anatomical, and they're not fossils either. They're living examples, and they fail to pass evolution theory. So I asked you about fossils. Where's
the anatomical novelty? I mean, there's no novelty between. What did you have on the screen there? A lion, a leopard, a house cat.
Yeah.
It's a
Okay,
question.
so what kind does the hyena belong to?
No, that's not an example from the fossil record of the evidence you said you could show us. I'm waiting for this example. Are you going to show us one?
Hyenas are part of the fossil record.
Okay, hyenas have always been hyenas in the fossil record, though.
But what are they? What kind are they?
Well, they appear to be a dog kind. Maybe they're something very similar to a dog. What's the point you're making? And
I think
Because
90.
they share more DNA with cats.
okay, that's not an evidence of anatomical transition, though. That's what we're looking for. Not, I didn't ask you for evidence of genetic similarity. That's abundant in living things. Gobs of that going on. Okay, and that's mostly due to protein codes anyway. So that's not evidence of evolutionary transition. So do you have
All
an
cats are
example?
genetically similar.
Do you have evidence from the fossils of a clear evolutionary transition?
Yeah, so all cats are genetically similar, so you can basically test that. So in the fossil record, we see layers sorted by anatomical difference.
No, we see creatures with different anatomies and different strata, and you extrapolate
Yep.
evolution going on in your mind. But I want to see evidence of clear transition in fossils, not an idea about when one creature lived and another one didn't exist at that time. Because I could talk about, coelacanth, which is absent from the fossil record for 75 million years, and when it shows back up, it's exactly the same as the coelacanth that was in the fossil record 80 million years before. So, but it's not been present for 75 million years, which means they didn't exist. It's not that they didn't exist. We just didn't have any record of them for 75 million years, according to evolution. So is this going to be the example that you give, the whale evolution series?
Yeah.
Okay. So show us the fossils and then tell us how we know that this is clear evidence of transition between to a whale from a non-whale.
Do you believe that this is the whale fossil, though?
I don't know that that's a whale. That's an extinct species of aquatic creature, which has two small fins in the rear and two large ones in front.
So what kind would you think this is?
That's Ambulocetus, if I'm not mistaken, and
It's not.
it's not Rhodocetus.
It's not.
It's not. What is it?
This is Durodon. No,
Durodon. Oh,
Durodon.
okay. Okay, so show us the transition, the series of transitions, and explain how we can know that that's evidence that one begat the other. I'm going to discuss this for a couple more minutes with him standing, and then I'm going to let you have the mic and debate something else with him for a little while, and then we'll go back and forth like that if you like.
Do you deny the relationship between a blue whale and a dolphin?
I'm not interested in that right now. What I want to see is your evidence, your claim. That
so you're dodging.
No, you're dodging because I asked you for evidence.
Right.
Where is it? Okay.
Yeah, so you asked me for fossil evidence of whales, and now you're telling me that fossil evidence of whales is off topic.
No, you said you can show a series of fossils that shows that.
Yep.
And then you just
so I'm starting with modern whales. Try to stay with me.
Okay. So whales and fossils. Okay. Not living.
Do you agree that a dolphin is a whale?
No, I don't.
What is it?
It's a different type of organism with apparently a different structural design.
Do you think killer whales are whales?
They say they are. It would appear to be that they're a type of whale.
You think the killer whale is a whale, but a dolphin is not a whale?
Okay, so whales can have baleen or they can have teeth. That doesn't mean they're not a whale. But that's not evidence from anatomy that we can look at and see one begatting another in the fossils.
So are you seeing my screen right now with the fossils?
For all I know, God created baleen whales, and he created whales with teeth separately, and they've always been separate since the creation.
Right, your model sucks.
Well, you might say that, but I'm just looking for this evidence from the fossils that we can see a series of fossils that shows clear evidence of evolutionary transition.
So would you agree that these are the same type of creature?
I can't make that assessment without knowing more than what I see on the screen there. They do appear to have a great similarity in homology. That what I would say.
That's an orca and a dolphin.
Okay. So what is the evidence that either of those came into being in the fossil record?
You agree that one is a whale and one is not a whale.
You're pointing to creatures that are living on the planet. We're talking about fossil record.
So these are just as similar as the fossils. These look the same.
So show us the fossils that show that either one of these creatures came into being from a non-whale or in the past. Show us.
So almost everyone agrees that a dolphin and an orca are the same kind and are related. But they look different, more different than these two skulls.
You're
And
talking
yet
about
this is a fossil creature and this is a modern orca.
okay, Justin, you're talking about extant creatures. I asked you about the fossil record. You made the claim that the fossil record shows clear evidence of transition, not pointing to two creatures that are living on this planet right now. I asked you about evidence from the past, the fossil record.
Extant animals are part of the fossil record.
So you're not going to point to the fossil record. You're just going to point to creatures that are living now.
No.
And say that's evidence that it happened in the past.
They're the end tail of the fossil record, and this is one creature that is living now and one creature that is millions of years old. And they have the same morphology.
Okay, it's the same. All right, now show us the series that shows that one came into being from a non-whale. That's what we're looking for. That's what you said exists.
Mm-hmm.
So you can't
show
that?
If you can accept that species like the blue whale and the orca are related, and you accept that this species, the orca and the Brygmophyseter, are related, then why can't you accept that the species of Basilosaurus and Durodon are related to the Brygmophyseter?
Okay, you're not listening to me. I told you that I think it's completely plausible that toothed whales and baleen whales were created separately in the beginning, that they're not the same kind. Okay.
So you don't.
So what I'm asking you is, I asked you about the fossil record. The evidence, you said the fossils show clear evidence of transition from one type of living thing into another. I said that's not true, but you say it is. So I asked you for 25 minutes now for an example of that, and you haven't shown me one. You've been talking about extant creatures. I want to see the evidence from the fossils that this has taken place in the past.
No, I'm showing you that you believe in the relation between different forms that exist now, but you're denying relation to forms that existed in the past.
Okay, so you're not able to show us a series of fossils that makes it gives us a visual representation of transition occurring in the fossil record. Then.
I've shown you about half of it. Would you be convinced if I showed you the skull that was between a toothed whale and a baleen whale, and gave you a mutation between toothed and baleen whales?
No, a skull is insufficient. We need a series of fossils that shows one organism morphing into another over time. That's what must exist.
So how do you know a panther is related to a cheetah?
Okay, so Taylor, I'm just going to accept that you're refusing to show one example of what you claim has taken place so many times that there should be umpteen bajillion examples in the fossils, but you won't show me one.
Yeah, I showed you several.
Okay, you showed me Durodon, right, and a whale. Right. You want to go back to that? Is that your example that you're going to provide? Durodon and Basilosaurus?
That's about half of them.
Okay, so Durodon and Basilosaurus, go back to those two and take a look at their anatomies, their bones.
Mm-hmm.
All right, right there. Okay, right. So we don't see clear evidence of evolutionary transition from these in any way. They both have small fins in the back, large fins in the front. Their anatomy looks almost virtually identical. Okay, There is no clear evidence of evolutionary transition going on between these two. All right. They even have the same type of spine, the same shape to the rib cage. They have the same looking scapulas. They have the same types of femurs and fistulas. Uh, bones of the limbs. See, these two creatures could easily be said to be the same creature, as far as I know. I don't see any anatomical difference going on there.
How
So
do you know? How do you know they weren't created separately?
there's no clear evidence of transition happening right there. That's not going to do it. So show
Yeah,
us.
but how do you know that these two individual fossils were not created separately?
I don't have a reason to believe they weren't. Looking at the fossils,
So why can't you be consistent with all life forms?
so you can't show me an example. You're not going to show me the whales. Is that it? It's not going
Can
to be.
you answer my question?
Okay, so you can't show me an
So
example.
you agree that consistency between life forms equals relation,
Okay.
but consistency between body plan can be
Okay.
assumed to be a relation.
Okay, so we can go off talking about something else if you want to. Similarities. I say you want to move the goalpost to
This is
similarities
the whole foundation of this.
in existing forms, but you won't show me an example in the fossil record. Is that your
You're
example?
looking at it.
Oh, that's it. Okay, so great. Now you're finally getting around to it. Okay, so these two creatures, there's a tremendous anatomical difference between them. One has a pelvis and legs in the back. The other one has two little bitty fins. That's a
They're
great.
just smaller. No anatomical difference whatsoever.
That's
They're just smaller.
Can you see that there's no pelvis in the one in Durodon?
There is a pelvis.
No, there is no pelvis.
Yes, there is.
There's a tiny bone that goes between them.
It's a tiny pelvis.
You want to call that a pelvis?
Look at it.
Okay.
Pelvis.
But the creature, those are not legs; those are fins. Okay, all right. Now that one
How
at
do you
the
know?
top has legs. Okay, go back up to it. Those are legs, not fins.
This is the difference between a leg and a fin.
Okay. No, that's.
Or I'm sorry,
one of them.
they are fins, but
Okay.
yeah, they're fins.
If they're legs, then why? How
Sorry,
come?
you got me confused there.
How come Durodon has flippers and can't walk around on land if those are legs?
Durodon is not presumed to be land walking.
Right, because it doesn't have legs; it had two little fins.
Yeah, hold on, I'm lost right here. We'll get right back to it.
So that doesn't work. You showed us a creature with fins and a creature with legs, right there. Okay.
Right, so it has the same structures.
Right.
There's no anatomical difference between these. They're the same number of finger bones, same conformation of arm bones.
Okay, so then
Everything's exactly the same.
Well, I mean, even if I'm going to use your fallacious example, then where's the transition in bones? Can you show me that?
What do you mean transition in bones?
See, what you're showing me is a creature that has legs and walks around on land, maybe amphibious, but it definitely has legs. Nobody in the world looks at those and say those aren't legs. One of them has legs. The other one has no legs. It has two little bitty fins. Okay. Now, if you want to say the transition, we'll stick to your standard of they have the same bones. Show us the transition in the bones then.
This is a transition, but this is why I said I don't lead with this, because I know that it's not convincing to you, because
no, it's certainly
you're ignoring the fact that these are found in different layers. You cannot find these in upper layers. You cannot find them in a different order.
I'm going to hand this off to Standing for Truth and let him chat with you for a few minutes. But before I do, I just point out that I just want to point out that there's no clear evidence of transition there. One of them is an animal that has two small fins. The other has legs, clearly has legs. You believe that one evolved into the other, and that's your business, okay?
No anatomical difference.
Listen, that doesn't provide the evidence that Stephen Jay Gould says wasn't present. He wasn't convinced by it. Niles Eldridge wasn't. Stephen Stanley is not convinced by it. All these other scientists who stated there isn't clear evidence of transition in the fossil record, Purcell, Cloud, Ernst Mayr, these guys weren't convinced by what you're showing. I'm not either. I'm sorry. Okay. Standing for Truth, if you want to talk to him about something, have the floor.
Yeah, this does not constitute This does not automatically mean change. It's the fact that the layers are ordered that convinces me.
Well, it didn't. It didn't convince the world's experts on paleontology.
Then the consensus would be for young Earth creationism.
Well, no, that's not true.
Go ahead, standing for truth.
He may have stepped away from. Oh, there he is.
I guess all I would have to say to that is, even if we look at these fossils on a molecular level, I mean, there's going to be so many necessary adaptations required, and they'd have to be, coordinated changes. And if you actually look at the time frame that's given for this, land mammal into a whale, it's so short. And even biologists, not sure if you're familiar with him, Richard Sternberg, I believe he accepts universal common ancestry, but he's even examined the requirements of this transition. He's looked at it mathematically, and his exact words were, there's just too many genetic rewirings in too little time. So even if, let's say you're convinced by the fossil record, how would you explain the many changes that would have to be necessary to convert your land mammal into a whale? I mean, just to name a couple, I mean, you're going to have the emergence of a blowhole, the modification of the eye for permanent underwater vision, modification of the entire skeletal structure. A huge one would be the ability to nurse, their young under the water, blubber for temperature insulation. I mean, there's just so little time and so many necessary genetic rewirings and adaptations. I mean, how can you get your land mammal to a whale? You got to start with there. And if you don't have an actual theory and account for this type of large scale change in the small amount of time that even the evolutionists will provide, well, then it's just pseudoscience at that point. I mean, do you have any testable predictions on how many beneficial mutations need to be fixated in order to lead to these type of changes? Go ahead, Taylor.
Well, I read a couple of studies in which they made predictions which are basically predict the phylogenetic tree independently. But so this is why I'm pretty confused on this, because this kind of change is actually completely consistent even with your type of creationism, even with the created kinds, because these are not anatomical changes. They're not major changes whatsoever. It's to me, this almost looks like a degeneration. It's losing its limbs. It's going from a complex arm to a stiff, basically featureless paddle-like limb. And all the blowhole is doing is moving the nostrils from the front of the face to the top of the head. And you can see that these are the same skull conformations. It's got the same ridges. The same kind of heterodont teeth, which is a mammalian trait.
Okay, so are you saying that to convert from a land mammal into a whale, obviously at least the skeletal structure itself would have to be modified and the forelimbs would have to be transformed into flippers, but a big one, the ability to nurse young underwater. I mean, how are you going to that's going to require multiple coordinated changes. I'm sure we can both agree with that. So how's that going to be possible because the fossil record, based on everything you're showing in the different layers that these bones are found in, it requires that this large scale evolution of whales from small land mammals would actually have taken place in less than 10 million years. So like I said, I mean, there are evolutionary biologists that say that there's just too many genetic rewirings and too little time. So like, how do you explain that? Are you saying that gaining the ability to nurse young underwater, I mean, that's a pretty huge adaptation, don't you think?
I don't know why it would be. I mean, as long as you make a seal, you can make a liquid transfer. And we well know that inherited behavior changes can diversify pretty quickly.
But don't whales in general have small population sizes and then long generation times?
I mean, I
From
guess
my
it depends on the whale. So
well, it just yeah. Go ahead.
I think dolphins have pretty big schools of. I think that's the term, schools of dolphins, and like pods of orca whales. I think are about 12 members, and then there's like smaller groups for like larger whales usually, I think.
Right, and I noticed you said that a lot of it is degeneration, devolution. It almost looks like, right? They're losing.
It could be.
They're losing their forelimbs. They're losing different structures. I mean, at the end of the day, that's still just degenerative changes, degenerative adaptations. You know, how did they get them to begin with? You know, it seems like so. Even in the fossil record, even in your claimed examples of a land mammal into a whale, is still based on, you know, the loss of information, the loss of structure, the loss of novelty. Like, where's the true novelty? Where's the gain in information? Because it just seems like the whole argument from the fossil record is just circular, because it requires an actual theory to account for the large scale evolution. So I mean, to me, it just seems more in the realm of pseudoscience, since there is no actual theory to account for the change. And 10 million years may seem like a long time, but for all this, even what evolutionists say is allowed in the geological record, in the fossil record, I mean, that's really, really short for this amount of adaptations.
I wouldn't say so. That's about the minimum time for like hominid evolution. Like, wasn't it like 10 to 25 million years?
I think it was, I mean, it's just so many multiple coordinated changes. And I mean, even evolutionary biologists themselves are recognizing a problem. And the thing is, yeah, some of the, if you're going to look to similarities themselves, even based on the design model, I mean, and I'm sure you're just going to say, you know, they don't reproduce, but even a Chevy Cruze and a Honda Civic, totally different makes from totally different continents, look almost exactly the same. So if I lined them both up and said, hey, you know, what kinds are these in? I mean, the whole fossil record is based on so much inference, in so much just so storytelling, that it's hard to say and conclude that that would be empirical science.
But if you look at the evolution of vehicles, for example, you can't point to, there are no transitional forms between a wagon and a car. Like, these leaps happen in short periods of time, and then there's differentiation between them.
Well, you can see, like I said earlier, you can see the like a crossover SUV, for example. I mean, you can't even you can't classify it as either an SUV or a van. It's your perfect example of a transitional, quote unquote, mode of transportation that blends the features. It's just mosaic. I mean, we go ahead.
So to me, the entire amphibian, what is it, a kingdom? But all the amphibians, to me, that's a transitional form. Those are half fish, half reptile.
What's the physical fossil evidence for this clear transition from fish to amphibian? Good luck with that.
Fish to amphibian? Well, I see all kinds of fish that are very amphibian-like.
Okay, so I didn't ask you about creatures you believe are amphibian-like. Can you give an example? I'm asking you for an example.
Well, I didn't prepare that as the same as whales, but I believe it's called the Tiktaalik.
Okay.
Well, right. Just like I said, based on the design model, there are products of human design that span two categories. For example, amphibious assault vehicles. So I think independent change based on the built-in capacity for adaptation. When you look at the biodiversity found in the fossil record, evolutionists with that assumption, that basic assumption of universal common ancestry, can probably take the adaptation we see and really build, kind of like with the bones you're describing. But I think a built-in capacity for change, that, because obviously a lot of these animals are under similar selective pressures, similar environmental factors, and if they have that same built-in capacity for change, well, at the end of the day, you're going to see kind of exactly like what you're showing here.
You know, Taylor, did you realize that tetrapod footprints have been found in the fossil record that evolutionists believe are 10 million years older than the fossil Tiktaalik? So that knocks Tiktaalik out of the water as a transitional form. Because apparently, if evolution were true, fish already evolved into land-dwelling creatures before Tiktaalik came into the scene. So that kills the Tiktaalik claim.
Why?
Because fish had already evolved into land-dwelling creatures.
Well, all that would need to explain it is that there was a different thing that evolved like a Tiktaalik.
Okay, so let me give you structural design evidence that Tiktaalik is not transitional. Firstly, it has fins. It has 4 fins. You can go into a museum of natural history in your city if you live in a city with more than 100,000 people, or 200,000-300,000. You probably have a natural history museum, and they'll have giant fish tanks there. There's one in my town. I can go look at Tiktaalik right now. The creature that looks identical to Tiktaalik is in the Mississippi State Museum of Natural History fish tank right now. The only difference between it is the distance between the eyes. It looks exactly like Tiktaalik. Okay, so it hasn't changed. We have the evidence of no change for this type of creature, which has 4 floppy fins. That doesn't mean it's in transitional form. And secondly, its shoulder girdle is dermal, not endochondral. What that means is it didn't attach to the spine with cartilage and tendon like yours does. Your shoulders, your scapulas and everything, they attach to your spine with it's endochondral, meaning it's locked in, okay, with cartilage and tendon. Your shoulders actually attach to your skeleton. Not so with Tiktaalik. It had a dermal, not endochondral. So in other words, it had no weight-bearing structure. It couldn't walk around on land any more than any other fish because it didn't have the necessary parts to make its shoulder girdle attached to its spine so it could bear its own weight on land. See, so that's a second knockout. So that Tiktaalik doesn't work. It had floppy fins up front, and that's the biggest reason that evolutionists claim it's transitional.
Well, I think the biggest one of that too is the whole tetrapod footprints found in lower layers, you said, than Tiktaalik itself, right? This was found after. These footprints were found after the fact, weren't they, Neff?
Yes, they were reported in
Poland,
Nature.
right?
And they were reported in Nature, volume 463, January 7th of 2010.
Yeah, I kind of found that interesting when I researched that as well. Like, how would you explain that, Taylor? Does that mean that these Tiktaalik-like creatures were just a separate branch than the true transitional forms? Because, I mean, how do you explain the tetrapod footprints before the Tiktaalik? I'm kind of curious as to your answer on that.
Well, I just said it before, as multiple different fish could have evolved like the Tiktaalik.
So is it kind because you said, you know, could have evolved? Like, that's what I mean. There's obviously going to be a lot of inference, a lot of storytelling, a lot of and is there a testable prediction based on that, you know, just so story, you know, because our whole point is obviously you can believe in this type of large scale evolution, but at the end of the day, is it empirical science? And I would say it's not, obviously.
Well, I'm not hanging my hat on the fish transition, but what would you say this creature is? Is this a fish or a lizard?
Which one, the Tiktaalik? I would just say
no, this one. This one. The Acanthostega gunnari.
I can tell you what that is. That's a giant salamander. Evolutionists incorrectly label as different species. They do this all the time. They find a beaver-like creature in the fossils, and they'll say, gee, that thing looks like a beaver. It's awful beaver-like, but it's nothing but a beaver. And they give it a different species name and say, look at this evolution thing that lived millions of years ago. They do this all the time. And so
Well, check
all
out,
that creature is a giant salamander. Because
well,
you
check
look
out
at
my
look at the skeleton of it, and then pull up on the internet a skeleton of a giant salamander, and oh my goodness, it's identical.
well, check
Yeah,
out
I
my
agree.
Well,
I agree. Amphibians are a transition between reptile and fish.
Well, where's the transitional forms that show that?
They have traits of both reptile and fish.
Well, we need the fossils that show us. Where's the series?
I mean, we can go through it. I did whale evolution, but you guys didn't like that, so
You didn't show bones arising. You showed one creature that had little bitty fins and another had legs, and one is dermal and the other is endochondral.
But the thing is, I mean, a few mosaic creatures, like I said, based on the fact that there is that built-in capacity, pre-existing heterozygosity, genetic diversity, whatever you want to say. There's obviously the capacity to adapt to responding environmental inputs. So you're going to see a variety of features sometimes. But as Neff said, you know, where is the series, you know, that would actually demonstrate what you're saying? And if you look at my screen, see my screen, what, based on the design model, those two interiors, are they built from the same manufacturer? I mean, there's a lot of similarities there. I mean, what would you say, Taylor? Would you conclude that they're related through the same designer, through the same manufacturer?
well, if I had a record and pattern of production with the Hondas, the Honda symbol branded on it, and the Ford symbol branded on it, I could look at that as a mutation. That's kind of how we look at
Well, let's say
common ancestry. Is once a mutation develops, it's going to stick with most of the ancestors as long as it's not deleterious.
Well, let's say that these labels were removed. Would you be able to tell conclusively what was, because one's got Chevy, one's got Honda. That prove that they're related through common ancestry? Because you can look at the Honda Civic and the Honda Accord, and then you can look at the Chevy Cruze and the Chevy Sonic, and if the labels weren't there, you're probably going to get a lot of people interpreting one of the Chevys and one of the Hondas related. But at the end of the day, that's false. That would be false. We don't have labels on these bones found in the dirt.
But they're all based on the original. They're all based on an original car ancestor.
Taylor, let me show you something briefly, if I may. This is from an article I wrote way back in about 2008. After a debate I had with Per Alberg, paleontologist at the University of Uppsala in Sweden. I had a debate with him in text in a blog in a forum. This is an artist's reconstruction of a Acanthostega at the top, and below it is a photograph of an actual giant Japanese salamander. Okay. Now here is an artist's reconstruction of a Acanthostega, and next to it is a photograph of a giant Chinese salamander. Now, the only difference we can see between these anatomically is that Acanthostega had up to 8 digits, whereas a giant Chinese salamander has 4. That could possibly be explained by genetic expression of information, adaptation. Losing something can be explained that way. Gaining stuff is not explained that way. That's what evolution would posit. But these creatures, for all practical purposes, are identical with the exception of the number of digits. Acanthostega had 8. The giant Chinese salamander has 4. Losing isn't evolution. You got to explain the arrival, not the loss of the feature with evolution. So what I'm trying to help you understand is this creature that evolutionists label Acanthostega and give it a name and say it lived millions of years ago is nothing but a giant salamander that's undergone adaptation because its environment has changed and it lost digits.
Actually, I was reading through the chat, and praise I am that I am. I was going to mention this earlier, but we were talking about so many different things, so fast paced. If if you're so convinced, Taylor, by the fossil record, by the bones found in the dirt, just let's say the whale series, for example, but it's not as consistent as you'd say, because when there are inconsistencies and say a lack of uniqueness in the phylogenetic trees, what are they explained away through? Well, convergent evolution. So how do you explain the fact that whales, dolphins, and bats are the only mammals that have echolocation systems? And if you actually look at, say, just gross anatomy, the whales and dolphins are then going to be classified closer to the cow than to the bats. But on the basis of their echolocation systems, they now belong with bats. But if you actually do a molecular analysis of the protein prestin, that puts whales and dolphins squarely with the bats. So, I mean, how do you explain that inconsistency and that lack of uniqueness? Are you just going to resort to the rescue device convergent evolution every time there's a big inconsistency like that? Go ahead, Taylor.
Convergent evolution happens, but no, basically, what was your question? Because you asked me if I was going to use convergent evolution, but what's the question?
Well, convergent evolution is just the appearance of the same trait or character in independent lineages. And what are we talking about? We're saying that based on the built-in capacity to adapt, you know, there have independent lineages that have adapted to similar environmental stimuli. So what I'm saying in regards to, say, whales, for example, how do you explain the evolution of the echolocation systems? Because the protein Preston puts whales and dolphins squarely with the bat. So how do you explain that entire inconsistency? Because it seems like that alone, anytime that convergent evolution needs to be invoked, it seems like that alone is strong evidence that what you're talking about and say these phylogenetic trees don't actually represent objective reality. And in a way that falsifies the entire theory of universal common descent.
So you're saying, like, why can't we classify anything with spots in the spot phylum?
Well, I'm saying that there's a big, because if you're looking at gross anatomy, if you're looking at skeletal structure, if you're looking at molecular analysis, say using the protein Preston, if you're looking at echolocation systems, I mean, it's not as consistent as you say. And that is exactly why evolutionists resort to convergent evolution and just say, well, okay, this is, you know, the appearance of the same trait or character in independent lineages. But at the end of the day, it just seems like the entire convergent evolution argument is a complete invention.
Well, it's the same reason you know that a bat's not related closely to a dolphin.
But the thing is, if you look at the analysis, if you do a molecular analysis of the protein Preston, that actually puts whales and dolphins squarely with the bats. So the thing is, there's selective treatment of the data. I mean, how do you explain the evolution of the echolocation system, since you know, we were talking about the apparent whale transitional evolution? How do you explain that?
I mean, I don't know about the echolocation protein you're talking about, if there is such a thing. But usually these proteins that arise in different species look different. They're slightly different.
Well, the protein is a sound. It's a sound sensitive protein, and what it is, it's essential for hearing just in general, and in particular it's part of the hearing mechanism of the echolocation system. So when we actually do a molecular analysis of the protein, now you have an inconsistency because it puts whales and dolphins squarely with the bats. But if you just look at the basis of gross anatomy, the whales and dolphins are now classified closer to the cow. So from my understanding, the evolutionists resort to convergent evolution. But at the end of the day, if there's no real testable predictions on that, it's just an invention, another invention. You know, everything is evidence for evolution type thing. Go ahead.
Exactly. Evolutionists have this mind-blowing faith, that something as outrageously complex as wings evolved separately in insects, separately in birds, separately in other types of creatures, because mutations can do that. They in fact do that. And so echolocation evolved separately in fish, and then separately in what mammals, and also separately in bats. Wow, isn't it amazing what random mutations will do over time if you get enough of them? It's an outrageous sort of faith that just doesn't have it doesn't stand up to scientific thinking. I think just to believe that echolocation could evolve once is an unfathomable faith to me.
Well, the thing is,
But
and yeah, go ahead.
isn't the protein just a change of existing ear structures? Like, I'm not familiar, but
Well, the Preston molecules in whales and dolphins, from my understanding, have 14 amino acids that are not in the Preston molecule of any other mammals except for the bats, whose protein Preston also has those same 14 amino acids.
so it's not really it's not really beyond the pale to say that that gene mutated a couple times over the billions and billions of replications that happened between bats and whales.
See, the thing is, the evolutionists will always just like you just did, and no offense, they just resort to the usual storytelling. Maybe this, maybe that, could have been this, but with no testable, falsifiable predictions. It's just pseudoscience. I mean, you can't just resort to this invention every time there's an inconsistency and lack of uniqueness in the phylogenetic tree. That's my whole point. I know you can.
It's not even inconsistent with your worldview, though. You understand that proteins can mutate. These are pre-existing systems, the hearing system, and a part of it mutated. You agree that happens, right? Let's assume pre-existing systems. Because evolution does not explain the origin of life. We assume that there is a working cellular and genetic mechanism already.
Right. If biological evolution means a change in allele frequency in populations over time, well, you need populations and you need alleles to change. But my whole point is that there's inconsistencies when you look at the basis of gross anatomy, because that puts the whales and dolphins closer to the cow and other ruminants than, say, to the bats. But if you look at the echolocation systems, well, now they belong with the bats. And when you look at, the protein Preston and you do a molecular analysis, well, now there's another inconsistency. So there's just let alone, like we were talking about earlier, with the amount of numerous coordinated changes to take your land mammal to your whale in only 10 million years, according to the evolutionary timeline. I'm not saying I agree with that, but there's a lot of, the whole point is a lot of inconsistencies in the data itself, that it's not as consistent as you're making it out to be. So at the end of the day, you can resort to an invention or you can resort to a rescue device, but it's certainly not going to convince someone like Neff and I, because a just so story is not scientific, really.
What's inconsistent about it?
I don't want to re-say everything, but just the fact that you have to invoke convergent evolution to explain the same trait or character.
But why is that inconsistent? Can you see my screen here? There's 5 different antifreeze proteins from different insects and different fish, and they all have the same function, and some of them have a very similar gene, but they're all constructed completely differently.
But there's no evidence of these genes coming into being from non-genes. The evidence, the claim of that is extremely specious, and we have a reason to believe that it's actually not so.
But evolution does not explain how genes began.
Let me show you this. Oh, it does. These antifreeze proteins exist in numerous species of fish, Okay, so finding one in this example that the evolutionists are parading around a lot is not some kind of unique thing. Okay, there's no. Here's the problem: is the
It's not unique.
AFP3s, right? AFP3s, we don't have any evidence. The claim is that they've show evidence from the gene, from the parent gene, and the gene that supposedly came into existence from it by duplication. We can look at that and see that it was a duplication event, that subsequent mutations caused SASB to arise from AFP3s. Okay, but if we look at the actual evidence for that, we find all kinds of whack nut things. We got mental gymnastics we have to do in our mind to believe it. It doesn't show it by looking at these two genes. They're remarkably different, dramatically different. For example, exons 1 and 2 show a similarity to 1 and 6 in the SASB, respectively. But the study's authors state that exons 2, 3, 4, and 5 in introns 1, 2, and 3, and 4 are radically different. Now, also, somehow it's missing part of exon 1. The exons in AFP3 aren't identical to the exons in ASB, so you have to explain how they could have evolved. In order to support this claim, you have to believe the exons disappear and introns disappear and others arise without a mechanism for that. No showing that happened. And the list goes on. So there are lots of crazy problems with this thing. It's just a belief that a duplication event took place, and then subsequent mutations created this new antifreeze gene. But you have to do a massive amount of mental gymnastics to believe that. It's not any kind of clear science. It's just, well, that must have happened, and well, I can see that this must also happen to explain this dramatic difference. And well, that would also have happened. And look, it did. There it is. That's how it works. And it just doesn't wash. It's not scientific.
Yeah, so when you know that genes duplicate and you see two genes that are 99% similar, that's not a leap. That's not a very far leap at all.
Okay, so gene duplication typically causes negative things. You're saying you believe evolution proceeds on the back of a process that causes destructive effects to genetic information? Because
Actually,
gene duplication is typically, overwhelmingly, causes a loss of genetic information. It's damage.
well, that I wanted to ask you,
Yeah,
Taylor.
you don't understand how negative traits are selected out.
No, you believe that all the negative ones are selected out, but you can't show that with science.
We observe it, and we do see that with science.
Okay, what example do we have where we see a bunch of recruit mutations disappear in a species?
But the fact that they don't get inherited by the species?
Okay, so no, there must be a scientific example. If all these accrued negative mutations build up in the organism and they're passed on, we know they're passed on, but you're saying purifying selection takes place, and somehow all these negative ones, they don't make it somehow. First, we understand natural selection can't see almost any mutation. It only sees the ones that cause the worst or best to take place. Vast majority, like 99.999% of mutations, natural selection can't see them at all because they don't cause enough of a difference for the natural selection to be able to detect it. A mutation would have to either make an organism so superior or so negatively affected that it's unfit to survive, that natural selection can then eliminate that individual, and that's how natural selection works. Okay, but the overwhelming majority of mutations, natural selection doesn't even see them. See, so how in the world are you telling us that purifying selection is not just an imaginary construct in the imagination of evolutions, but actually works, whereby we can show an example that natural selection weeds out the vast majority of negative mutations and leaves only these imagined good ones? We don't have a scientific reason to believe that. Why do you get this? Where do you get this idea?
Because that's what we observe.
What
Most
example has been
mutations,
observed? How has that ever been observed? Show us. Explain.
well, we don't see every mutation get passed on.
Oh, the overwhelming majority, I'll say it again, the overwhelming majority of mutations are passed on if they become fixed. Okay, right? They're passed on, and because natural selection can't see them. See, so but you're saying that they're somehow wiped out. But natural selection can't wipe them out unless because it can't see them. See, that's the problem.
Yeah, if it can't see them, it has no effect on fitness.
Well, no, that's
No, because
true.
yeah, I think that's the big misunderstanding, because you're thinking that these neutral mutations are not harmful, and then there's going to be no effect on fitness. But the thing is, that response that I hear often misunderstands the entire point at hand. For one, that I always talk about, and obviously Neff's talking about here, because yeah, most mutations, Taylor, they're going to be neutral from the perspective of the organism's physical fitness, right? The phenotype. But all mutations must have effect on the actual genetic content, right? The genotype. So in no way, in what you're saying, are mutations truly neutral. They all must have effect on the genotype. And just like he said, if these are unselectable and they build up in the genome, 100 per person per generation, no selection scheme can stop this process. At the end of the day, they're just building up. It's like rust on a car. It's continuous. It's destructive, and they're not truly neutral like you're talking about. And that's the problem. It's like looking at an encyclopedia, a book the size of an encyclopedia, and you got one single spelling mistake. Is there going to be a huge fitness effect? No, of course not. It's going to be a tiny fitness effect. But at the end of the day, it's continuous, and eventually the entire message is going to be corrupted. So I think that's your issue, because yeah, you keep thinking that a lot of these neutral mutations, these unselectables, there's no fitness effect at all. No, we're saying there's a tiny fitness effect, so tiny that natural selection can't see it. That's the problem.
Yeah, but it's so tiny that by the time it actually has any effect, there's some other mutation that compensates for it. And most of those conformations are actually selected out. So the ones that are left are actually, they have little to zero deleterious alleles. And through the synergistic effects, that actually lowers the selection threshold. So that means that it's always reducing the number of alleles. So you will get accumulation even in the lower populations, but the next round, those ones, the worst conformations, will be selected out because the threshold is made lower by the synergistic effects, which means that a lower amount of mutations will result in a loss of function. So that means that they're detectable at lower levels if they're really bad.
So, Taylor, what you're espousing now is a lot of philosophy about science that evolutionists concoct. The simple fact is this: natural selection cannot see the vast majority of mutations, and they get fixed. They are passed on permanently in the species. That's just a fact.
Right. Well, I just want to say one thing about the synergistic epistasis itself. When you actually look at the numerical simulations, though, in regards to these interactions, it seems like when there is substantial synergistic epistasis happening, it actually makes the genetic situation worse, not better. And it fails to actually curb deleterious mutation accumulation, as you're saying. And to the contrary, and what would actually be logical, Taylor, is it causes accelerated genetic degeneration and rapid extinction. So, but just like Neff said there, these escape mechanisms, right? Synergistic epistasis, mutation count mechanism. Well, what's interesting, when people deny the fact of genetic entropy, I always just say, well, then why are these population geneticists theorizing about escape mechanisms such as synergistic epistasis and mutation count mechanism? Obviously, they're acknowledging that there is a degeneration issue, but the thing is, they're artificial, they're contrived, and they're profoundly unrealistic biologically. So it comes down to a philosophy, a built philosophy to explain away the obvious.
But it's not a philosophy. It's looking at patterns and actually occurring populations.
Here's how we know it's philosophy, because we know for a fact that the vast majority of mutations to become fixed in a genome cannot be seen by natural selection. In fact, they won't They just can't be.
Yeah.
Because natural selection passes on mutants, not individual mutations, unless a given mutation causes such a detrimental effect that that organism immediately is born with a defect that causes them to be unfit for passing on their genes, like somebody born with Alzheimer's or a brain defect, or a gross physical deformity. See, so or they're just so sickly that they can't reproduce. So the vast majority of mutations are not seen by natural selection, and they do accrue. That's well established. So now it's the evolutionists believe that these slight mutations, which are deleterious, are not a negative. That's where the crazy belief of the evolutionists comes in. They believe that slight damage events to DNA are not actually damage, that they're actually benefit. This is an atheist myth, an evolutionist myth, that random genetic mutations are the preponderance of them are either do nothing or they're good. When the truth is, the vast majority of them are negative, and evolutionists simply refuse to accept that, because if they accept the fact that random genetic mutation is overwhelmingly negative, then they have to throw out evolution theory altogether. Game is over. It's all done. Let's go home. And they won't do that. So they deny science.
So you say that the vast majority are invisible to natural selection and get fixed, and so they'll get fixed as long as they don't interact badly with other mutations. And so if any mutations accumulate that don't mix with what's already been accumulated, that don't mix with what it does, and if the slight mutation, if they don't mix with what it does, then it will get selected out. It will die. But if the slight
No, that's not true. A mutation doesn't have to interact with another mutation. It just happens. It just has to be to affect the organism in some ever so slight way. That's all. Your idea that it has to interact with some other mutation is completely false.
It's not false. It happens.
The vast majority of mutations don't interact directly with other mutations.
The vast majority.
I just posted a paper to the side chat. Can synergistic epistasis halt mutation accumulation? Results from numerical simulations. So it's from researchgate.net. You can look at that. But
yeah, this is John Sanford.
It can't be true. Cornell University geneticist. It can't be true.
He's looked at this degeneration problem. Like, for example, Kimura, his entire analysis was oversimplified. He didn't even acknowledge beneficial mutations in his analysis, and that's key to understanding the distribution of deleterious mutations. So these numerical simulations done by Dr. John Sanford are rock solid. These papers have been looked at with no serious critique. And these rescue mechanisms, these escape mechanisms, they have been falsified, but synergistic epistasis is the last ditch effort for population geneticists, ones that recognize there's a degeneration issue, to try and solve it. Because there's no tapping out when it comes to the evolutionists. They have to fight long and hard at looking for a solution. But at the end of the day, you can accept the data for what it is, or you can fight it. I mean, there's nothing more we can do to prove it to you.
Yeah, let me share something with you on the screen now. This is a perfect example of it. This is from Department of Organismic and Evolutionary Biology, Harvard University, 2005, and they state this. And here's the important thing. On missense, meanderings in sequence space, a biophysical view of protein evolution, they state this, clear admissions. Okay, our understanding of protein evolution is incomplete, if not fundamentally flawed. They state appeals to evolutionary genetics in part because it can account for the approximately constant rate of protein evolution. So it appeals to the idea of evolution instead of the science. Okay. Then they also admit, however, its premise that most missense mutations are selectively neutral has been systematically rejected by protein biochemists who recognize instead that almost all missense mutations have large biophysical effects. They say also, indeed, nucleotide sequence analysis have uncovered pervasive positive selection for amino acid replacements. In other words, amino acid replacements do happen. The effects of those are overwhelmingly negative when single nucleotide variants occur, and they negatively affect proteins. And this idea, this is where their greatest admission here, appeals to evolutionary genetics in part because that what they state here is, however, its premise, that is what? The appealing to evolutionary process to fix the problem, is what he's saying. He says, of that, he says, however, its premise, that is the idea of appealing to evolution to fix it, that most missense mutations are selectively neutral, has been systematically rejected by protein biochemists who recognized instead that almost all missense mutations have large biophysical effects indeed. Nucleotide sequence analysis have uncovered pervasive positive selection for amino acid replacements. In other words, the amino acid replacements do occur. They don't get selected out by natural selection. The mutations that change the the arrangement of amino acids in proteins do get fixed in the genomes. And the overwhelming evidence for this, what this causes is disease. The medical journals report countless papers on the observed effects of swapping out amino acids in a protein sequence, and the effects of that is typically disease, not evolution, disease.
No, the majority of those mutations are selected out.
No,
by
that's
natural
no.
selection.
No, I just read from you a science published in 2005 from Harvard University that says you're wrong. They
No,
say
you
they are
didn't.
not. Well, let's go over it again. Now you're in denial of what I just provided on the screen. Let's show it again. Okay. Unbelievable, man. You can show these people this stuff and they'll still say, yeah, it ain't true. But
Yeah, try and earn a degree of saying that shit.
okay, look, I just read it to you. Okay. However, its premise that missense mutations are selectively neutral has been systematically rejected by protein biochemists who acknowledge that these changes do get fixed in the genome, in the protein code. That the missense mutations that swap out amino acids one for another do get fixed. They are not eliminated systematically by natural selection. Okay, they become fixed.
This paper literally says here the deleterious effects of mutations are rapidly and effectively compensated by conditionally beneficial mutations. That refutes your entire worldview.
Sure, they believe that, but that doesn't negate what they state clearly, which is that the mutations that change amino acids in the DNA do indeed get fixed. They're not largely selected out; they become fixed. You're saying they don't. You're
selectively neutral ones get fixed. Yes.
You're saying, okay, so that's the problem. Now, then we come to the problem, is that you believe
that's not a problem.
that the ones that all get fixed are somehow neutral. But what I'm trying to press on you,
wrong.
What I'm trying to press on you is that ain't so.
It's a straw man.
No, it's not a straw man.
No, they're nearly neutral.
No, because they cause a change in the amino acid order in a protein, right? They get fixed. The majority of them do get fixed. Right?
Nearly neutral ones, yeah.
That's what this paper is saying. Okay. Okay. No. Okay. So missense mutations are selectively neutral has been.
Well, this paper doesn't say that the majority gets fixed.
However, they say this, and I'll quote them again. However, its premise that most missense mutations are selectively neutral has been systematically rejected by protein biochemists.
Yeah, I reject that too. Everyone would.
So
this doesn't support your point.
So your statement, the current science shows that your statement that the most mutations which affect amino acid chains are selective or neutral is, according to the latest publications in science, not so. They acknowledge that they do become fixed. So that's what you said about that. Oh, okay.
Selectively neutral means that they are invisible to natural selection.
They're not saying that. I'll read it again. Listen carefully to what the scientist says. However, its premise that most missense mutations are selectively neutral has been systematically rejected by protein biochemists.
So most missense mutations are not selectively neutral.
That's right.
That means most missense mutations are selected for heavily.
That's correct. That's the point I'm making. They do become fixed. And the medical journals are chock full.
No, getting selected is not getting fixed.
No, oh my word. What is wrong? That is what getting fixed means, that they become part of the genome. Okay?
That doesn't mean that it was selected for, this is talking about negative selection.
The paper is stating that the vast majority of mutations, missense mutations, are not systematically, are not neutral. They're not selectively neutral.
So they're under selection pressure.
Right. Well, always, right? Now, negative natural selection doesn't see the majority of these because it doesn't see the majority of mutations. Unless a mutation causes a destructive effect that is very profound in an organism and causes them to be unfit for survival, natural selection will not remove it. It will become fixed. Okay, that's the problem. So what the medical journals show is that the vast majority of these mutations, which do substitute amino acids in the protein codes, cause a negative effect to the protein, which results typically in a disease.
Which are heavily selected for, right?
Well, obviously.
The deleterious effects are selected out. They're not selectively neutral. That means they are selected for. They're negatively selected for.
They are selected.
You just disproved yourself.
No, Taylor, I'm starting to wonder about your intelligence now. I really am getting serious about this.
You're literally saying two different things in the same sentence.
So let me explain it to you in a real simple terms. Okay.
Well,
most mutations are not visible to natural selection. Most mutations that change amino acids. Most mutations which change amino acids in a protein code are not selected out. They do
the opposite of what you read.
No. They're not neutral, right? They have an effect. That's what it's saying. Okay.
So they're visible to natural selection.
Exactly. And yet they're fixed in the genome. Now, the effects of these is overwhelmingly negative.
Where does it say that?
The effects of them is overwhelmingly negative, and that's why the medical journals have countless papers that describe the observable effects of missense mutations to protein codes causing one disease or another.
Honestly, it can be summed up like this, okay? Just to make it easily understandable for the audience, and I don't know why Taylor can understand it. Natural selection is only going to remove the worst deleterious and detrimental mutations, and then it's only going to amplify the very best beneficial mutations. But what this indicates is that the accumulating damage is largely invisible and unselectable. So it's these low impact, near neutral deleterious mutations that build up. They're slightly deleterious. They have a slight effect on fitness, very small, like rust on a car, like a typographical error in a text. They build up, slowly degenerate our information system. So it's mostly invisible because it's invisible to natural selection. And that's the biggest problem the evolutionist who hopes, dreams, and imagines that, you know, fish to fisherman evolution is true, can't seem to understand. But it seems pretty understandable to me, at least.
Because you just contradicted yourself.
Evolutionists have this mythological belief that changing out amino acids by random mutations in protein codes doesn't have a negative effect and it doesn't cause accruing.
No, that's wrong. That's a straw man.
Fitness, and that's just wrong.
No, that's a straw man.
No, it's not.
This paper says it's not invisible. It's not selectively neutral. It is visible to natural selection, which contradicts what you said.
No, it doesn't say it's selectively visible. It's visible to natural selection.
Then it would be selectively neutral, and it concludes that things are not selectively neutral.
Neutral, meaning it's not either selected for or against. It just
Right.
happens and becomes fixed in the genome. If it
It
can't
can.
by natural selection, it's not going to get selected out, Taylor.
The majority of them are not selectively neutral. The majority are not invisible to natural selection. How are you missing this?
Taylor, what the paper is saying is that there is no natural selection effect that removes the majority of the protein codes, mutations that become fixed.
That's the exact opposite of what it says. It says the majority are not selectively neutral, meaning they are being selected.
Yes, and they're becoming fixed.
No, if they're being selected against, they're not becoming fixed.
Taylor, you have this false belief that random genetic mutations are automatically selected out automatically by some mysterious mechanism in the genome of living things.
It's called death.
And right, if the effect is clear and is dramatic enough. But what Standing for Truth is trying to explain to you is natural selection does not see the vast majority of mutations that occur to the organism.
No, it does see the vast majority.
No.
It says the vast majority of missense mutations are not selectively neutral.
That is not what.
Therefore, the vast majority are seen. There are some that are not seen to evolution, and they are slightly deleterious, and that's what you're referring to.
Now, what the paper is saying there is, if a protein code is affected in a dramatic enough way, it will cause a dramatic negative effect. But if it's not, then it gets passed on. And that's just the science. That's what scientists agree to now. Geneticists in general agree with that.
But what does it say the majority are? Harmful or selectively neutral?
And that's when I point to the medical journals and I inform you that when scientists report the observed effects of a mutation that swaps out an amino acid in a protein code, the effect is overwhelmingly negative to the organism. It causes weaknesses or disease, not anything beneficial. But
so would you call that selectively neutral?
Say that is verification that the idea that mutations build new proteins that cause functional, healthy, beneficial, thriving, fit to survive creatures over millions of years cannot be scientifically true. Because
so is a harmful mutation selectively neutral?
It depends on the effect. A lot of people have. I'm hypoglycemic. That's a protein mutation. I can still survive and have children that are perfectly healthy, but I am not 100% healthy because I have hypoglycemia. Now, if I also get another mutation that causes diabetes, well, now I'm less fit. If I also get one that causes, Alzheimer's, that's another negative effect. What I'm telling you is the slight negative effects of changing out amino acids to proteins is not beneficial. It doesn't cause evolutionary change. It causes organisms to move towards extinction.
So the majority are not selectively neutral. Therefore, the majority are selectively visible. Do you agree?
No, that you're taking what the paper says in the wrong light.
But do you agree that the majority are not selectively neutral?
What it's trying to convey to you is that if a protein gets changed by amino acid substitution, that is a dramatic effect that causes the protein to become completely dysfunctional, then the natural selection will remove that one with a backup copy, or the organism goes extinct. That's why the others get passed on, because they don't provide a profoundly negative effect, maybe a slightly deleterious effect, and those get fixed and passed on. The effects of that occurring over time is destructive to organisms. It's not evolutionary change, it's devolution. That's what I'm trying to help you understand. Evolution can't be said to be proceeding by a process that continuously makes organisms unfit to survive. And you tinker with protein codes, that's what you're doing.
Well, I wanted to ask Taylor one thing because he didn't address it in our last debate. I'm just curious what he thinks in regards to linkage groups, because these mutations in these linkage groups, as you would know, Taylor, they're linked basically forever. And so if you have lots of, say, bad mutations in that linkage group, and say that linkage group is now reducing in fitness continuously based on these accumulating deleterious mutations that you talk about, and then you throw in one or two beneficials, they're just going to be neutralized by the large numbers of deleterious mutations. So it seems like these linkage groups can only get worse and not better. And you didn't address that in our last debate. I'm just curious what how you would explain that away in regards to linkage groups. Go ahead.
Before I want to share this one more time. I just want to, and I'll be brief, okay? I want Taylor, listen carefully and read along with me, please, for just a moment. This scientist says the neutral theory of molecular evolution, which states that all mutations that reach fixation in a population are selectively neutral, appeals to evolutionary geneticists in part because it can account for the approximate constant rate of protein evolution. However, its premise, that is their ideas of appealing to evolution, that most missense mutations are selectively neutral, has been systematically rejected by biochemists, protein biochemists. What this paper is saying is the idea that evolutionists have that most mutations to protein codes are selectively neutral is false. That's the opposite of what you're saying.
That's a straw man. We don't believe that. I don't believe that.
That's the opposite of what you're saying. Right. And this paper is pointing out that that belief is wrong.
That's a wrong belief that evolutionists do not hold. That no science teacher would teach that.
Well, this guy seems to know what he's talking about. He is a biochemist, you're not, right?
Yeah, he's right. The vast majority are not selectively neutral. The vast majority are harmful.
That's not what
You
he
agree,
said.
right?
Taylor, let me show you one more time. Okay, you're not reading along. You're not. I don't know what kind of going on with your reading comprehension right now. You're not following what he says. It's really not hard. Read what he says. Okay, let me show you what he says.
Can I read you the sentence I'm using?
He says this. However, its premise. Now, what premise is that? We go back a sentence. The neutral theory of molecular evolution, which states that all mutations that reach fixation in a population are selectively neutral, appeals to evolutionary geneticists in part because it can account for the approximate constant rate of protein evolution. However, he's talking about that belief that they hold to. Its premise, this premise, that all mutations that reach fixation in a population are selectively neutral is false. Has been rejected. Okay, because mutations that affect protein codes are observed to cause destructive effects to the efficiency or function of the protein. So it's either going to get immediately selected out because the organism suffers a terrible disease, and they state that right there. And a little further down, they say there are currently no models that can reconcile the constant rate of protein evolution with the biochemical reality that missense mutations have large context-depending effects and the few, if any, are selectively neutral. Okay? Do you see that? Let's read that again. There are currently
We agree with that.
no models that reconcile the constant rate of protein evolution, that's your idea that protein evolution occurs, with the biochemical reality that missense mutations have large context-dependent effects and that few are selectively neutral. Okay, so what I'm saying is the vast majority of mutations that occur to protein codes do.
Well, that last sentence is a little outdated, but
where we go from there is what are the effects of mutations to protein codes. That's what we need to do. Okay, and when we go there, what we find is, as I pointed out, the medical journals record posthumously the negative effects upon the organismal fitness caused by mutations to protein codes. That can't make the conflict between this and the idea that proteins evolve and explain the 80% difference between human and ape proteins cannot be true. It's either protein evolution is true or what we observe in the laboratory and in the hospitals and the clinical studies is true. Both cannot be true. That's my point.
But as I was saying earlier, Taylor, I'm interested in your response. If in regards to linkage groups, if the good mutations and the bad mutations are not separate or cannot be separated, and then the bad mutations are then deleterious, some of them overwhelmingly deleterious and significantly outnumber the good mutations, then it's known that these linkage groups are only going to get worse because these blocks of DNA are essentially immune to recombination. So you didn't address that in the last debate. I was just curious as to your thoughts and your rebuttal to linkage group degeneration. Go ahead.
Every time a new set of mutations is added to the new generation, it goes through a selection process. So if the buildup and effects of the mutations leads to a loss of function, then it dies, and that can happen. But some of them don't, and those get to live on.
Taylor, you have this belief, but let me give you an example of something that points out how wrong this idea of yours is. From the paper Predicting the Effects of Amino Acid Substitutions on Protein Function, published by Fred Hitchinson Cancer Research Center, Seattle, Washington. They state this: because single nucleotide polymorphs can affect protein function, they are believed to have the largest impact on human health compared to SNPs in other regions of the genome. The statements like this in the medical journals are countless, thousands of them. Okay, what we observe happens to proteins when they're mutated is it causes either death or an organism that's slightly less fit to survive than its parents were. And that can't be true if evolution is true. That's all I'm saying. I'm done.
Then we would have died 100 times over.
Exactly. That's why.
That's exactly what population geneticist Alexei Kondrashov said. Why are we not dead?
That's exactly
why are we not 100 times over.
So why are we here,
my friend?
But we haven't. So your model's wrong.
No, because he's assuming a long genome, an old genome. The thing is, genetic entropy not only disproves large-scale pond scum to people type evolution, it also demonstrates that genomes are young. And even in regards to the stasis we see in the fossil record we were talking about, based on this accumulation of low-impact, near-neutral deleterious mutations, there shouldn't be let's say a horseshoe crab, which is essentially the same, essentially complete stasis, deep in geological time versus now. It disproves long ages. It proves that our genomes are young. There's a major time issue there as well. So yeah, of course, somebody like Alexei Kondrashov, who is an evolutionary population geneticist, is going to say, why are we not dead 100 times over? Well, at the end of the day, he's looking at it the wrong way. Our genomes are young, and that's exactly why we're not dead 100 times over, but we will be.
Well, he's just trusting the scientific consensus of the entire geological community, but he disagrees with you, so I don't see the point. And there are studies that model what you expect, and those don't last past 100 generations, but humanity has. So either you admit that there's something that slows us down on that mutation rate, or you admit that we've survived too long, even for your model.
Well, no, I'm admitting that natural selection can certainly slow down the degeneration process, but natural selection, as I said earlier, only because the thing is, if you actually look at the no selection zone, I mean, anybody should be able to see that, most mutations do fall within a no selection zone because the majority of them are neutral. We're saying they're near neutral, but even with strong selection, if we gave you generously a generous amount of selection, the entire zone, the no selection zone, is going to undergo degeneration. So yeah, selection is going to slow down the process, because let's say the substantially bad mutations, the ones that are given a clear phenotype, those will be selected away, of course, because it's a fine tuning mechanism. It's going to keep the species as strong as they can be, but let's say an occasional rare high impact beneficial, say antibiotic resistance, whatever one you want to use, those will be amplified. But as I said a million times, the accumulating damage, it's largely invisible, and that's why it's a slow degeneration. Natural selection will slow it down, but at the end of the day, just like Alexei Kondrashov said, why are we not dead? Why are we not extinct 100 times over? But he's looking at it. He's looking at it the wrong way. Population geneticists, they're coming up with escape mechanisms, synergistic epistasis, mutation count mechanism, whatever it is. They're fighting it hard, but Neff and I are simply telling you that there is no solution, and any escape mechanism, it's just a god of the gaps at this point.
Exactly. The reason we haven't gone extinct 100 times over, as Kondrashov points out, we should be, and the mystery of how we haven't is called the mutation load paradox. It's called a paradox because scientists who study genetics can't figure out how it is that we still survive as a species, considering what we know about the effects of mutation. So the reason he wonders how it's possible is because he believes, of course, that human beings have been on this planet for 1.5 or more million years. And under the rate of mutations that are getting fixed in our genome, that shouldn't be the case. We should have gone extinct 100 times already. So they're call this a paradox. It's a paradox. We're still here. We're still accruing these slightly negative mutations. How in the world is it we're still in existence? They can't figure that out. And the answer is, as Standing for Truth pointed out, is because our genomes aren't 1.4 million years old. We've only been around thousands of years, and that's why we're still here. If that rate of slightly deleterious effect had been going on in the human genome for the evolutionist's imaginary timescale, we would have, as Kondrashov points out, gone extinct 100 times. But you know how often that is? Take 1.5 million years and divide it by 100. That's every 10,000 years. Every 15,000 years, mankind goes poof, gone. Every 15,000 years, we should have gone extinct. So, but the Bible says mankind's only been around for around 6,000. Hey, it looks to me like we're on the way out pretty fast. We've only got several thousand more years to go, and maybe we'll be kaput too if Jesus Christ doesn't come back.
So,
well, the thing is, even at this point in time, you can go back, 50, 60 years. The elderly, they were thought of as, wise counsel. Now we just see entropic degeneration on all levels. As I've said, there's a pandemic, Alzheimer's, cancers, immunological diseases, autism's on the rise, asthma, autoimmune diseases. I mean, 12,000 new mutation-related diseases per year. Dementia. I don't know how anybody can look at the actual evidence, and especially if you work in the healthcare field, and not conclude, wow, man is degenerating. And a lot of people will say, oh, man lives longer than they ever have at this point. But the thing is, yeah, sure, there's medical intervention. The average age has maybe gone up, but the maximum age has not gone up. And based on this entropic degeneration on all levels, and based on this increased genetic load, cancers are going to skyrocket. Cases of dementia-related diseases are going to skyrocket. Autoimmune diseases are already skyrocketing. I just don't understand how anybody can. Alexei Kondrashov was right. Why are we not extinct 100 times over? And we're already seeing the pandemic on all levels. It's scary, to say the least.
Yeah, Kondrashov says this. He says, quoting, if substitution's at 10%, of all nucleotide sites have been selected coefficients within the range, and he gives a mathematical number, et cetera, et cetera. He says some data suggests that substantial fraction of nucleotides typical to a species may be optimal. He says, but when selection acts on different mutations independently, this implies too high a mutation load. This paradox cannot be resolved by invoking beneficial mutations or environmental fluctuations. In other words, natural selection ain't going to help it. Changing environment doesn't help. Contaminant and you can't invoke beneficial mutations. He says, I'll quote him, this paradox cannot be resolved by invoking beneficial mutations or environmental fluctuations. So adaptation to the environment and beneficial mutations have no power to stop it. It's constantly happening. It's building up in our genomes, and natural selection and the idea of beneficial mutations ain't doing a thing to stop it. Can't, because the overwhelming negative, slightly deleterious mutation can't be seen by natural selection, and they get fixed.
Then he goes on to say synergistic epistasis is a possibility, and then we proved it about 20 years later.
Right. So no, we haven't proved it, and so that's one of these imaginary constructs that Standing for Truth told you about. This is a rescue device. It's an imaginary process that the evolutionists concoct, like the term.
No, it's not. Will you allow me to explain?
Like the term, I've studied it. Like the term,
you've been speaking for like a long time,
right? But like the term.
Okay, I guess I don't get a chance to speak.
Like the term. Oh, well, now you've made me, because you constantly want to stop me. I can't think of the term, but the ideas of selection, they come up with terms related to selection, like soft selection, epigenetic stasis. These kinds of things are imaginary constructs. They're constructs in the mind. They're not demonstrated to be a real effect.
No, what he's describing is an outdated model where we look at how mutations, when they build up, that they just stack linearly. So that's outdated because we now understand that mutations, when they stack, they have differing effects because they interact differently with different mutations. And that was proven in 2017.
No, that's an imaginary construct to fix the problem that has not been resolved and will not be. That's your belief. Your belief in ideas.
All right, well, let's go through it.
See, your belief is that my idea.
Prove to me that it's imaginary, so I'll explain to you what I believe about it, okay?
Evolutionists believe these ideas that they construct in their head fix the
That's
problem.
right, I understand. So prove to me that it's just fake, and I'll tell you why I believe it.
Well, because countless scientific journals have reported that slightly deleterious mutations do not get selected out by natural selection. They're fixed.
Was that article you cited earlier?
I could probably show you 100.
Because that's not what it says.
I could show you 100. That is what Kondratiev says, and that's what lots of other scientists have said.
So do you believe that different mutations can have an effect on existing mutations? That they can essentially mix, like someone with a different mutation can have a different effect from that mutation because they have different genes?
It's possible that a mutation can happen to a gene that's already been mutated and cause subsequent damage. Yes.
So in other words, do you believe that one mutation can modify existing genes in a good or bad manner?
In a good manner, I think that's a specious term. In a bad one, obviously. In a good manner, I think that depends on what you mean by good. Can a bacteria become immune to an antibiotic? Yes. When it comes to good, when you mean good, is there any observed change to an organism because of mutation that moves the organism even slightly towards becoming something other than what it is, or promotes the idea of evolution of one type of living thing into another? The answer is absolutely and unequivocally no. No evidence from that in genetics.
It could be a mutation, any simple mutation.
Well, what can be any simple mutation? What does that mean?
Well, so if mutations are interacting with each other, you could have a simple mutation that just maybe upregulates a gene that already works.
You can have mutations. Okay, get to a point. What are you trying to say?
That's a beneficial mutation.
Okay,
You could have a mutation that downregulates something that you need, or a mutation that upregulates something that's good for you.
Okay, so is too much of a good thing a bad thing?
It could be.
Right, and it is in many cases. Alzheimer's is caused by, believed to be caused by the overexpression of a gene, and when you get too many of those proteins in your bloodstream, they start attacking the brain, and that causes Alzheimer's. So it's a good thing that we have that protein. It's a bad thing that it's overexpressed.
So a downregulation mutation would probably be a good mutation, right?
No, I think the proper chemistry, biochemistry is good. When you start tinkering with it with random mutations, less of something that you were designed to have, or more of something you were designed not to have too much of, I think then you start you're providing evidence of the crumbling genome.
But if we're crumbling and we see an overexpression of this gene that causes Alzheimer's, then we would be correcting the situation by downregulating that thing that is supposedly overproduced, right?
That is a possibility, but none of this would move the organism one iota towards becoming another type of living thing, you see. And so the types of examples that you and every evolutionist in the world like to point to have no effect on your philosophy of evolution at all. They don't support it. That doesn't change structural design over time to make an organism move towards becoming some other thing. You're talking about messing around with the biochemistry of an organism. That's never going to change the structural design of the organism. So
I'm just talking about correcting what you think would be a genetic decay.
Well, I just want to ask Taylor one thing, because when we had our discussion portion in our last debate, and the fact that a lot of these beneficial mutations are reductive, and beneficial mutations are obviously rare to begin with, but when I asked you to provide an example of a mutation that adds new, novel, and meaningful information, you brought up the antifreeze protein example. But I wanted to ask you, because you're familiar with epigenetics, they're finding out that a lot of these so-called beneficial mutations are actually just epigenetic related. And in regards to the antifreeze protein, right, this so-called antifreeze protein that keeps the blood of these Arctic fish from freezing. And you can look at the paper. Obviously, it's there's research that's looking into into how it happened. And, a lot of inferences being made. But based on this adaptation, would you say that there's good evidence that that also could be an epigenetic regulated, say, non-random change? Because if these fish go into this freezing cold water, and then all of a sudden they adapt this this change and this benefit, what do you think?
Sure.
Okay, because there is evidence growing that even that specific example is based on epigenetics. So that's no help. So right there is
those are mutations, though.
But the thing is, an epigenetic mutation and epigenetic change is not gonna is not an example of a novel gain in information. That's the whole point. If you're it's not going to explain away it's not going to solve the problem of net gain versus net loss. So that's the thing. A lot of these examples that evolutionists are saying are an increase in genetic information are now known through further study to be just epigenetic related. So,
well, it's not a gain of information, because the information is all there. It's in the DNA, but it's a gain of a function.
I want to make a suggestion, guys. We've been talking about this for a long time, and Taylor expressed an interest in talking about more than just evolution. So I would suggest that we move the subject to something else Taylor would like to talk about, if you guys want to. We've been on this mutation thing for a long time. We can talk about some other subject in evolution, but Taylor said that other things he would like to talk about too. Taylor, did you have some other subject you wanted to discuss as well as evolution or genetic mutations?
I
We've been
would,
talking
but
about mutation a long time now.
if we could, I would like to go a little farther with trying to explain the epistasis and the
Well,
majority of harmful mutations.
I think for me, just because I have to be up early, I don't mind giving, because yeah, we've been at this for a while, especially this specific kind of topic and subject. I don't mind, letting Taylor say a few things in regards to what we've said. I think me personally, I'm going to have to end it here, but maybe in the next few days we can set up another discussion and maybe just set this whole evolution thing aside, since we've really hammered it down in 5 lengthy discussions, and then we can spend an entire hangout discussing other things. It's up to, I mean, for me personally, I got to get going soon.
Okay.
If you guys want to stick around, that's fine with me.
Okay, well, glad you came in. Anyway.
Yeah, I just wanted to address those really quick, like maybe a minute or so.
Yeah, go ahead, take your time.
So that paper you cited earlier says the majority of mutations are not selectively neutral. Therefore, the majority are selectively visible. And you agree that the majority of mutations are harmful. And you agree from that paper that the majority are selectively visible. And so therefore, the majority of harmful mutations are visible to selection. And so basically, different mutations, each organism is going to have a different set of mutations. So you're going to have a different range of how these mutations mix with their parents' genes. So every time a new set of mutations is added in, all of the ones that interact badly with the ones that are present are selected out. And we're finding that out almost 22 years after this paper that you cite from Kondrashov. And so I don't think you'll be convinced just by that, but I think we could benefit from going really in depth on that on later occasions. But yeah, we can move on from there.
Okay, to that I would just add the last statement in that paper that I showed you, what states there are currently no models to reconcile the constant rate of protein evolution with the biochemical reality that missense mutations have large context effects and that few are selectively neutral. So they do have an effect. Now, I would just point out that the evolutionist has to believe that that they're beneficial and not overwhelmingly negative, because that would contradict your evolution theory, right?
Well, there are currently models because that's an old paper. There have been papers since then.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to disagree that such a model exists. Is there any other subject you wanted to discuss besides mutation? We've been on that for about an hour and a half.
Well, I mean, we can talk about the origin of life and why, or morality if you want.
Well, either one. You pick one. I would say the origin of life is possible because outside of a cell, there's no chemical reaction that produces ribose. Ribose is the backbone of RNA and DNA. Unless you have that, you won't have life. So since nature doesn't produce ribose, it has to have an enzyme present to make ribose. Abiogenesis is scientifically impossible.
Well, real quick, guys. Neph, I want to thank you so much for having me on. Taylor, once again, very interesting discussion. Hopefully we can do many, many more. I enjoy them every time. Guys, have fun and have a good night.
Okay, buddy. Take care.
Yeah, we'll talk later. See ya.
Okay, bye.